Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video about my favorite books by Black authors. It is Black History Month right now, and there's also the Blackathon going on that is organized by Jessie. I will link the announcement video down below if you're interested in joining in. And I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about some books by Black authors that I really love. And I'm definitely not an expert on that. Like, I have not like a very big knowledge about books. I have like certain genres that I enjoy reading, and these are just books that I like. So even though I wouldn't say that this is like a very unique or expert list of books, I still just didn't want to miss out on talking about some of my favorite books. And maybe if you have a similar reading taste to me, you might enjoy these as well. I will link some other channels down below where you can get even more great recommendations for books by Black authors. But let's get into my personal favorites. And I think I have 20 books here if I counted correctly. But yeah, let's talk about these books. So the first category is Honourable Mentions. So these are books that are not like my favorite, but that I still very much enjoyed and that I think a lot of people can find interesting. So yeah, this is more of a random category right here. And the first book I have in this little category is A Full Disclosure by Camryn Garrett. And this, I think, is a very interesting book. This is a contemporary YA novel. It follows a main character who's HIV positive, and I thought that this was quite a unique perspective that I had not read before. This character is also adopted by gay parents, and it just follows this main character's life. It's kind of, yeah, just like a YA novel that was like very popular for a while, where, you know, some people find out about something and it's all about the stigma and whether you want to reveal it or not in school. So the plot is kind of basic, but I thought this added interest because it deals with HIV is just very interesting, and I felt like this novel definitely helped understanding the kind of science that we have now about HIV and just reducing the stigma of it as well. So that's why I really enjoyed it. The next one on my list is The Deep by River Solomon. I think this book is kind of a niche interest, but I just really love the concept of black mermaids, or mermaids in general. So I was really intrigued by this book because in this one we follow a mermaid, but I don't know if they used a different term, I'm sorry. It has been a while since I've read the book, but basically this one has a lot to do with trauma, with memory, and just the weight that comes with remembering. And this book kind of deals with the idea of slaves who died on the ships or were thrown overboard of the ships when they were abducted from Africa. And so this book definitely has a very heavy theme. And that's what I was drawn to. Like, I really liked the idea of the book. I wasn't the biggest fan of the kind of plot because we get kind of like a romancy aspect as well, which I did not expect, and therefore like wasn't absolutely in love with the book. But I just really loved the idea, and it's very short, it's a novella, so I would highly recommend just checking it out and seeing for yourself whether you like it. Then we have a more recent read, and that is How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue. This book I had very high hopes for. It was a 5-star prediction for me. It didn't end up quite there, but for the majority of the book I was really in love with it. Just the ending irked me quite a bit. But in this book we follow a fictional village and quite a few people in that village. And the whole idea is that there is an American oil company who is basically poisoning this village in Africa, and they don't have the power to do anything about it, and so they have to watch their children die because of poisoned water. And it's just a very sad but very realistic story. As I said, the ending did not quite work for me personally, but I really enjoyed this kind of mixture of like colonialism and the capitalist idea, and then the environmental aspects as well. So yeah, I did like this book, unfortunately not quite the 5-star. And then the last book in my honorable mentions is The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. Now I know that some people really don't like this book, and I absolutely understand why. I liked it, and it wasn't a 5-star, but I did enjoy the reading experience of this book. And basically this one is kind of sold as a thriller, and that is probably mostly what it is, but it's kind of a weird one. We follow a girl in the publishing industry, and she is for a long time the only black girl in this company where she works. It's a very white working environment, and we also see some of the racism that happens within this space. And then one day there is another black girl who starts working in this firm. That's where the title comes from. But there seems to be something off with this character, or maybe it's just something off about our main character. So we do have a little bit of an unreliable narrator, but yeah, I did enjoy this, even though it was like very easy to see where it was going, and it kind of like, it was a little bit like painful to watch the main character not get it for a long time. But I kind of liked the twist at the ending, and I just thought it asked some very interesting questions and made me think about things. So I did like it. Okay, so next I'm going to concentrate on the adult books that I've read, and during the end I will have the YA books. And first I wanted to go into literary fiction, so these are adult literary fiction books that I loved. The first one is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This is probably not a big surprise if you've watched my channel for a while. I really enjoyed this book. It was one of my best books of one year. I don't know if it was 2020, maybe 2021, somewhere around those lines. In this book we follow basically two sisters, and they are white passing. They come from a place where being light-skinned is very valued, and when they are a little bit older they separate ways, and one of the sisters decides to live as a white woman. She marries a white man, and the other sister doesn't do that. She's not passing, and she marries a very dark-skinned black man. And we follow these two sisters. We also follow a little bit of the story of their mom and just their childhood and stuff. But we also follow their daughters, who again live very, very different lives, because the one basically grows up as a white girl and she doesn't even know that she's not completely white. And the other one obviously grows up with the knowledge that she's black, and because of her father, her skin is also darker again, as it was her mother's. And so in this like village where the two sisters came from, the daughter is like seen as something bad because she's darker skinned. So yeah, this whole perspective of colorism was very interesting to me. I do enjoy reading about passing, about white passing. This is a concept that I've read about before in a couple of books, and I think it just really shows how socially constructed the idea of race is, and I think that's why I find it so fascinating, because you can really see this, like, you know, the construct kind of failing at these points where people can pass from one socially constructed category into another one without people realizing. So yeah, I think that's why I find this so interesting, and that's why I enjoyed this book so much. Next we have Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This book is also quite short, but absolutely beautifully written. It's almost like poetry, like the author definitely has an amazing writing style. That's the first reason why I would absolutely recommend this book. And then this book is also a super interesting look at being a black man in the UK. I think this is mainly set in London. And we have this kind of love story, but I actually would have preferred the book without the love story in it, because I didn't really need it. But yeah, we follow this male character that meets a woman and they kind of fall in love, but this is just such a great reflection of what it means to be a black man in the UK in a white space. And I just love that. And yeah, it's just melancholy, but also it just transports all of these feelings so well, and the feelings of helplessness and rage and everything. I just absolutely love this book. It's definitely one I want to reread at some point, because I feel like just because the language is so beautiful, you can like reread this like multiple times and still get something out of it. It's just amazing. And then another one of my absolute favorite books is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. I'm so excited that we will get a new book from this author this year. I am so ready for it. But Stay With Me was just amazing. It's such a great book. This one is set in Nigeria, and we follow a woman who falls in love. But because of the gender roles and stuff, it's not that simple, basically. So we have this couple, they get married, but then they can't have a child. Like, the woman is just not getting pregnant. And so while she's kind of pressured to do all these like rituals to conceive a child, her partner is pressured by his family to take a second wife. And when they got together, when they fell in love, they actually promised that they would be monogamous. So this is obviously a problem now. And it was just such an interesting look at this like gender theme, how the role of women and men is defined, and how we view a couple who can't have a child, and what we think is the issue there. And it just goes so much more deeper. It gets really messed up. I have to warn you about that. But I loved it. The kind of mixture of literary novel, but then also almost kind of like a thrillery aspect at the end, where you just want to find out what the hell is going on with this family. It was just great. I love this book. I definitely want to reread it, because it has been a while since I've read it for the first time. And as I said, I'm just so excited to get a new book by this author, because yeah, it's gonna be great. I'm so sure it's gonna be great. Now moving on to historical fiction. I have also 4 books I wanted to mention for that category, and some of them do cross over into literary or even classic territory, but I thought historical would be the best kind of headline. So first we have Conjure Women by Afia Atakora. This book took me by surprise, I gotta be honest. This was a book that I had checked out from the library multiple times, but then just never really gotten around to. But then I would always get intrigued again and just check it out again. And then I finally read it and it was so surprising. I loved this book so much. In this story, we follow almost like a whole plantation. So we have a clear main character, but all the like workings of the plantation play a very big role. And this is set right before and right after slavery was abolished. And so we kind of see this hole that was created because the slaves were basically set free, but they didn't have anywhere to go. And we see how one woman solves this problem for her community in a very unique way, definitely a questionable way. I love this book. We basically have a main character who is the daughter of the healer, so her mother was the healer for the plantation, so she had kind of a privileged position, and she didn't have to work in the fields and stuff like that. And so I thought this kind of divide was already interesting, to see this daughter of the healer who was always already set apart a little bit from the other slaves of the plantation. And still she feels this urge to take care of these people, and these are still very much her people. And yeah, that was an interesting perspective in itself, but then we get this other character who is kind of a wandering priest character. He's a black man who has his like own religious teachings, and so he comes to this town, and there's almost like a kind of like a little bit of a conflict between these two characters, because the daughter of the healer is more based in like medicine, also nature, and what that can offer, and he's very much based in like Christianity. And this is just kind of like a conflict I really enjoy reading about, especially when it is a female and a male character, and this creates a very interesting tension that is dealt with in this novel in a very intriguing way. But we also look at the relationship of this main character, the daughter of the healer, and the white family who owned this plantation. So yeah, it was just so fascinating. Such a great read, and definitely underrated. So I thought I'd screech about it a little bit more. Then we have Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. So this definitely goes into a sci-fi and into a classic direction as well. I still put it under historical fiction because I feel like that's mostly what it felt like to me. Because in this one we follow a character who is living in the 70s. So from today's point of view, that's already kind of historical, but it wasn't when the book was written. And then this woman gets transported back in time into slavery times, and she meets her ancestors. And basically the issue is that one of her ancestors is the white owner of a plantation, and she has the like very hard decision to make whether she will save his life to ensure that her family even exists, basically. And this novel is just so amazing. It was very surprising to me how quickly I could read it, how easy to follow it was, because sometimes with like classics, even modern classics, can be a little bit hard to understand and to follow, but with this one I had no problems at all, and just the questions it raises are so interesting to me. And yeah, it just really makes you think, because you have this like modern day perspective on this like, yeah, historical time period that was obviously very horrible and hard for a lot of people, and the way that our main character has to find her way to fit in this historical setting, because otherwise she might be killed for it. It's just so interesting how that was portrayed and discussed, and I really loved it. Next up, we have two books by the same author, but I kind of love them equally, even though I have to reread one very much because I don't remember enough. And that would be The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Now, this book is very famous, you've probably heard of it, but this is the whole idea of, yeah, the Underground Railroad, which was a system of just people helping enslaved ones to flee to the north during slavery times. And so yeah, it takes this idea but kind of plays with it as well in a fictional style, and we're following two characters, I think a woman and a man, who try to flee on the Underground Railroad, and we follow their journey basically. And as I said, I don't remember enough about this book, but I definitely want to reread it, and I know that it was absolutely heartbreaking. It was one of my favorite books of that year where I read it, and it was also a book that I gifted to my mum, so that's always a good indicator that I really enjoyed a book. But yeah, definitely need to reread to just refresh. I'm not quite sure whether I'm making it up, but is there gonna be a movie as well? Or is there already one? I don't know. I'll have to check that out. That was just a thought that came to my mind. So yeah, definitely a great book. And then the other one I have read more recently is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This book is also amazing, but it's definitely very, very hard to read. It has very hard-hitting themes, and the way the story is told is just heartbreaking. And in this one we follow a very young black man, or like more like a boy basically, at the beginning of the story, and he is a really good kid. Like, you see him interact with his, like, I think it's grandma it is, and he's just such a great boy, like very good kid, and because of something that happens or a situation that he gets into without any fault of his own, he is basically taken to this reformatory school, and it's just so heartbreaking. This is inspired by an actual school that really existed in the US. And the whole idea was that young delinquents were sent there to be made into like functioning members of society. And basically they were beaten there, they were mistreated, and it's a really heartbreaking story. And because this main character is black, he gets into the even worse part of this school, because there is a white part and a black part. And yeah, we just have to read what happens to this character at the school, but we also follow the character after he gets out and how that impacted his life. And he basically never really recovered from that experience. And he could never live up to his potential because of what happened. And it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I think I read this within like 2 or 3 days, and I was so glad when I was done, because I just could not handle it. It just pulls you down, and it's definitely not a book that you can like enjoy, but it's a very, very good book, and if you like to torture yourself a little bit, I would highly recommend that one. Okay, so talking about that leads very nicely to my next book I want to recommend, and that is the only non-fiction I have on this list. That is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. This is a non-fiction book about the US prison system that I very much liked reading, not because it's nice to read about, but because I thought it was very informative, but I also really enjoyed the style it was written in. So this was definitely not a dry book at all, and I learned a lot from this, because as someone from Europe, I actually had no idea what Jim Crow even meant. And I feel like the book could have done a little bit of a better job of explaining it, but at the same time, we have all Google, so it was easy to figure out. And so in this book, it is discussed how the prison system in the US today is very much just a new way to enforce the difference between the races that was done in Jim Crow as well. So I really enjoyed this book. I think that it is a fascinating look at this topic that a lot of people need to read and to know about, to really understand how inequality is created through this prison system and how it is held up. So yeah, I definitely recommend that one. Okay, we talk about more oppression, and now we're getting into my only adult fantasy recommendation. So I definitely need to be better at reading adult fantasy from Black authors, I've realized. But my recommendation, obviously, you have guessed it, is the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It's my second favorite fantasy series I've ever read. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. It has two like major themes. One is oppression and the other one is motherhood. So if you enjoy any of these themes, or if you just like reading fantasy, I would highly recommend reading this series. The first one is the 5th season. In this series, we follow a world that has come to its end. There is a very big event that happens at the beginning of the first book that sets off the ending of the world. And we follow a couple of characters during that time, and we see basically what the world was made of. And let me just say, at the beginning of at the end of the first book, you will definitely agree that maybe this world really needs to end. And I thought it was just such an interesting exploration of this oppression and what it does to people, and how it is just formed from fear and not understanding, and just thinking that other people are lesser. And yeah, just such an interesting exploration of this very real thing, you know. So yeah, I love the Broken Earth Trilogy. I already want to reread it. Okay, from there we go into YA fantasy, and there I have a couple more recommendations. And the first one is a bit weird because it is technically a second book in a series, but I just love this one so much that I wanted to have it on this list. So it is A Chorus Rises by Bethany C. Morrow. This is technically the sequel to A Song Below Water, but it follows kind of the yeah, the mean girl character of that first book. And I just really love mean girl characters, so I really identified with this book, or not identified, but I just really enjoyed it. I loved following this character who is just very unapologetically herself. And in this book, she definitely goes on a journey of self-exploration. Also, the themes of family are very strong in this one. But in this world, we have just basically different creatures. So we have sirens who are only black women, and they're really feared in this society. And in the first book, we focus on one of these sirens. But our main character in the second book is something else that I forgot what it's called. But those are basically like very highly regarded creatures. So yeah, she has kind of a position of privilege, but she's also a woman of color. And so this is kind of what is discussed in this book. And I just really loved it. I thought it was a very interesting kind of crossover of like a contemporary story and a fantasy story in this YA setting. The next one is Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. Now this book surprised me so much because I don't like zombies. I don't like zombies in movies, in books. So I never really planned on reading this book because in this one we follow a time period that is kind of historical in the US, but there are zombies. So I think instead of the Civil War, there is a zombie apocalypse, something like that. And I thought I just don't like zombies, so I thought I would not like this book. But then I saw it in the library and I was like, oh, you know, it's October, just try it. And it blew me away. It's such a good book. I loved it. The main character is so fierce, so amazing, and I loved everything about this book. I think it is also sapphic. I'm pretty sure that there's two girls who are romantically involved in this duology. And yeah, this book is just great, and if you have slept on it, I would highly recommend picking it up now. There is also a new book that comes out this year, or is already out, that is co-written by Justina Ireland, and I need to get my hands on it because it sounds amazing as well. But yeah, I highly recommend this one. The sequel was good too, but it had a time jump right in the middle, and that just throws me off. So the first one is definitely my favorite. Then one that you probably are sick of hearing me talk about is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is just one of my all-time favorite books, and I just reread it last month, so I'm not going into great detail, but in this book we follow a trans girl called Jem who lives in a utopia where all the monsters are gone, there's no more oppression, but one day one of the paintings of her mum comes to life, and it's Pet. And Pet is there to hunt a monster. That's the basic premise, and if you really want to read about a utopia that for me personally was believable, you need to read Pet. I love this book so much with all of my heart. It's perfection, it's also very short, and everyone needs to read it. And the last one for YA fantasy, also no surprise, and actually the next book I want to start is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. So this one also really surprised me. Like, I thought I would like it, but I am not big on reading like King Arthur retellings, and this kind of takes King Arthur and turns it on its head, and I love that. So in this book we follow a young black girl who goes to one of the white colleges in the US. She's in kind of like an early program. So when she gets there, she finds this like secret society, and she has the belief that this secret society has something to do with her mother's death. And so she kind of wants to infiltrate the secret society to find out why her mom is dead. Now there's a lot of reasons why I love this book so much. One of the reasons is that we have two very different magic systems that are kind of portrayed, and that I think we will explore even more in the second book. We have a more nature-based magic, and then the magic that this secret society uses. And because we have this main character who kind of gets into this very white space, obviously we have a lot of the discussion what the also after effects of slavery times of the Jim Crow era and so on are. And I think that it's just something that we need more of, like not only these historical fictions who show us how horrible these times were, but more books that talk about the effects that all of that still has today and how Black people, especially in the US, are still affected by it every day. And I think especially when we start talking about reparations, this point of view is like very, very important. Also with like the whole discussion about monuments and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, we need more books who portray that, who focus on that, who show us the immense like price that people, Black people, paid for, yeah, this history of the US, and what we have to do to one day hopefully make up for it a little bit. So that's why I loved this book, I think, because it's still a little bit of a different perspective than the other books I had read before. Okay, now leaving fantasy behind, I have two YA contemporary books. Now, I don't read a lot of YA contemporary, but once in a while a good YA contemporary on audio is perfect for me. And so I have two. The first one is obvious, and I don't think I have to say a lot about it, but it is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It is one of the first like YA contemporary books with a Black main character that really blew up and was everywhere. And I was really glad to see it because this book is just so great. I also really loved the other books by this author, but I thought I just used the OG one right here for this video. And in this one, we follow a character who's also a teenager, and it just deals with like everyday racism, with growing up as a Black girl, but again, in a white space because she goes to school that is predominantly white. And we see that during the times when like the protests about police brutality and stuff like that surge, and how that is perceived by her white friends and herself, and also the effects on the neighborhood where she lives. And it's just a very well-rounded view at that, and I think it was just a great kickoff for a lot of other books that could follow in the footsteps, basically. So yeah, it's been a really long time since I've read this book, but it's one that I will always think of because, yeah, it was just one of those first like really great ones that were everywhere and so popular, and I was just really glad to see it. And the other one that I really, really love is Felix Ever After by Kirsten Callender, and this book is also so great, and I would recommend it to everyone who enjoys YA contemporary books. In this one, we follow a trans boy or demi boy, I think, Felix, obviously from the title. And in this book, yeah, the ideas of transness are discussed in great detail. What I really enjoyed about this book is that we don't see a trans character who is like super firm in their gender identification. Is that how you say it? I don't know. But yeah, so this character is still questioning. Like, this character knows that they're not a girl, like that's for certain, but all the other things are still not quite clear. And that was such an interesting perspective to follow. And I just really loved this perspective. Also, it was portrayed how Felix goes to get testosterone shots and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just very interesting to read about. And the last book I wanted to talk about is a thriller, a YA thriller. And that one is Ace of Spades by Farida Awike Iyumide. And this book is amazing as well. Like, this is one of my favorite books, like one of my favorite YA books for sure. And in this book, we follow two characters that are Black and go to a white school. And these are basically the only two Black kids in the whole school. And we have two very, very different characters, because we have the guy who is more shy. He likes music, I think, and he's gay and not out. And then we have the girl who's basically the queen bee character and very popular, has very rich parents and stuff like that. But they have one thing in common, and that is that they're not white in this school. And when kind of, again, we have the blackmailing plot, someone starts revealing their secrets, they have to band together to find out what's going on. And I loved this book so much. Like, I love a YA thriller that has high stakes, and this was definitely it. I was on the edge of my seat for a very large part of this book. The dangers felt very, very real for these characters, and I think the exploration of racism that we have in this book is very interesting, thought-provoking. And at the same time, because it is a thriller, you also have a little bit of fun because, yeah, I don't know, the thrilling feeling kind of, you know, is sometimes nice to enjoy, I don't know. So yeah, I really loved that book. It was great. So that's it. I don't want to know how long this video is. I'm sorry, but I wanted to talk about all of these amazing books. I hope you will pick some of them up because, yeah, these were just all amazing. And I would love to hear what your favorite books by Black authors are, so I can just broaden my horizon and read even more. And I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye!